us like the high sign. Yeah.
Thank you so much, everyone, for coming, watching, and tuning in. We have a really great treat today. We have Kristen Cliffel, who is an artist that we have exhibiting in our current show, Duo Trio. And she's going to tell us a lot about her personal life, her art making process, her artworks in the show, and she's going to answer any questions that you guys have. So please comment your questions down below, and we will be sure to have Kristen answer them. And with that,
thank you so much, Alexa. Thank you, everyone, for coming. It's so great to be a part of this exhibition. I especially want to thank the curator, Christine Shearer. What a lovely exhibition she put together, and a diverse body of work that's really dynamic and exciting, and lovely to see how it represents the diversity of artists in Ohio working within this framework of diptych triptych. I am going to start with sort of a personal history of how I come to art making and my studio practice. And I'm a Cleveland girl, so I grew up in the bowels of the Rust Belt, just a few hours north of Columbus here. And I also had a really nature-based part of my life. My parents were campers and hikers, and so the city and the country were both sort of equally dosed in my upbringing. I went to the Cleveland Institute of Art and graduated in drawing and ceramics in 1990. Had some amazing instructors, Judith Solomon, Bill Briard, Stephen Bradford, Mary Jo Bowl, who is here in Columbus, an incredible array of people. And I was fortunate enough to be an intern at Anderson Ranch Art Center a few of the summers during my art school career. So I was out west in the mountains of the Rocky Mountains, working with hundreds of different ceramic artists for those couple of summers. That was a really huge influence on my practice because so many artists came and went, and it was such an incredible, dynamic, lovely place to be a student and see what was going on in the broader art world. I did come back to Cleveland to graduate from the Institute and was making large sculptural things right from the get-go. I was fortunate enough to have a residency right after school at the Banff Center for the Arts out in Alberta, Canada, which was another giant gift from the city back to the mountains out in Alberta. So I worked there for about 9 months. These pieces were built before I left. I had a long-term boyfriend who I sort of lived with during art school, and this piece on the right was called We Like to Grow Together, and it's much taller than me. I'm sort of talking about the long-distance relationship that we were going to have. So from the beginning, my work was very much about my life and how I lived it. The telephone poles, there was a cityscape on the inside of the one beat and a cloud and sort of mountainscape on the inside of the other piece. That pair on the left was a beautiful beginning to a whole series of sort of fertility icons that I made that were all about the female body, yet represented with avatars like fruits and voluptuous forms that weren't a human. I did drive across to Banff and was completely swept up by the landscape and the lovely opportunities that I had there, living amongst the elk and deer and working just furiously for 9 months. I came back with a huge body of work to show in Cleveland and had my first two-person show after art school in Cleveland. I was waitressing at that time to get enough money to go overseas and see one of my icons, my ceramic icons, Antoni Gaudi. So I did go to Spain by myself for 3 months to just eat up all of the juicy ceramic history that is on the Iberian Peninsula, architecturally and sculpturally. So waitressing really paid off for me and has still become in and out of my life. I can bartend, guest bartend, and still love that part of my practice. It is definitely a part of my life. Serving people and food and drink is really goes hand in hand with being a ceramic artist, I think. So I did move back to Cleveland and met this lovely man bartending before I went to Spain. He quit his job and followed me, and we were married less than a year after we met. And quickly my imagery turned to happily ever after and what the heck am I doing? You know, I never sort of felt like I was going to follow that happily ever after trajectory. So the piece on the right is a large wedding ring, and it says choose, choose, choose on the inside. It's about this big. And sort of ruminating physically on where I was in my life was what I was doing. About 3 months after our marriage, I got an opportunity to go, after the wedding, I got an opportunity to go to the John Michael Kohler Art Center. They have a program called Arts Industry, and they invite artists to come and work in their factory, their toilet factory, and their sinks factory. So these are toilets being cast on the bottom, and that's me working in the studio. I was working with some sewing dummy forms, thinking about headlessness and armlessness as a metaphor for loss of agency in women. And at this point, I had been overseas to Spain and Morocco and seen a lot of sort of subjugation of women and cloistering of women, and came back and this sort of unfolded in my studio practice. So I was at Kohler for 3 months and got the opportunity to use whatever I wanted. The piece here is called Rosie the Riveter, so I did some research on how women felt moving into the factories during the war, being traditionally domestic workers and then moving into the factory. I was only one woman with about 3,000 men on the floor every day, and it was very intimidating. So I just kind of dove in, and this piece is cast clay, and then it's sprayed with iron. The base is cast iron, and the back is sort of for domestic scenes versus the factory scenes. They have this piece in their permanent collection at Kohler, a lovely, lovely program if anyone has the opportunity to do arts industry. It was a real gift. I came back after 3 months there, back to my home studio in Cleveland with my husband, and kept sort of going with that whole body of work dealing with women's sartorial propriety and the presence of absence, the lack of someone being in that sort of attire. So the piece on the right is called Armor, and it's an apron that's plated with steel on the inside. These are life-size pieces. And my mother is the oldest of 7 children, and my grandmother, or 9 children. My grandmother is one of 7 women children. And I always saw her in this beautiful, like, fancy apron. She would have a hostess apron and a cooking apron, and I had internalized that when I was young and thought of these as feminine armor. The pieces sort of started coming off of the sewing dummies and becoming real garments. The piece on the left, or your right, is called Lucky Gal, and she is also full life-size, my size, filled with poker chips. Just the perfect little figure and the perfect little self, but yet lacking a real person inside of there. This piece is called Journey, and I found myself pregnant. I came up pregnant after 6 years of being married, so it wasn't a total shock, but I hadn't seen that sort of in my future that soon. And this piece is called Journey. Those were my dancing shoes. They're clay, of course, and they're a little bigger than the shoes that I actually wear, but I felt as though I had to iconize those, that part of my life, being kind of the wild, traveling, dancing queen, was over. And so it's sort of almost statuary, sort of a relic and a memorial to that part of my life. So I did have these beautiful kids, but they kind of felt like, oh my God, what were you thinking? I wasn't super cut out to be a mother, although I was, a big sister and a helper to my family for years, and do love other humans, but I didn't see myself in that role in a sort of perfect way, in a dynamic and fluid way. This piece was the first piece I built after having my son Jack, and they are worry jars. So I was a completely neurotic mother, thinking, of course, he's going to fall down the stairs, or my husband's going to fall down the stairs with him. He's going to get cholera in our house. An airplane could crash into our house. So I was so neurotic that I made these jars. The stoppers are also clay, and they're one piece. So I write my neuroses down and actually physically put them in the jars. So I stopped them up. So they were called worry jars, thinking about worry beads and women who made things that they could worry over, almost like a rosary, but these were my sort of sanctimonious therapeutic jars. I did not make them to sell, but was asked to show them. And of course, on the first night, the opening night, they sold. I panicked. I was like, oh my God, what am I going to do now? But I made myself another set. So this was the next sort of piece in that era of just becoming a mother and trying to continue my studio practice in the best way that I could. This is called Keep Up, Let Go. And she is about this big, sort of in that prostrate stance, almost being sacrificed. She is literally a brick house being covered with ivy. The bricks are stamped with Keep Up and Let Go on certain bricks. I had been at a Greek festival with my mother pushing my son Jack in the stroller, and a colleague came up to me and said, Kristen, what, you had a baby? And I was like, yes, last time I saw you, don't you remember? I was like out to here. And he said, no, I thought you would just let yourself go. And I was like, oh my God. So I was like, Bob, I had a baby. This is Jack. He's 6 months old. So that was the impetus for this piece. But it was definitely that time when I was struggling with how do I continue to grow as an artist and really fully embrace this new role that I have as a mother. So there was a struggle, and that came out in this beautiful object. I was in my first house in Cleveland and had a studio there for, I guess, 11 years. My son was born, and I got a little nuts by the neighborhood. I was loved our house. We had redone it ourselves. But by the time I was pregnant with my second child and 40 ounces were piling up on my porch and they weren't mine, I was like, okay, it's time to go. So we lived in the inner city, and we packed up and moved on. So this piece is called Moving On. Being a ceramic artist, so many times we get asked to create functional works, which is the natural outgrowth and part of ceramic history. And I love that. I love an assignment. I absolutely, just go like this when someone says, will you make a teapot or salt and pepper shakers? Yes, I totally will. So over time, I have made functional works. The piece on the left is, these are all 3 teapots, but she's called No Place Like Home. She pours out of her hand. The tornado pulls out, and she would be filled with water there. The bride in the center, she's wearing that giant rock. My husband was actually the bride at our wedding, but this sort of embodied that time when it was all about the cake and the perfect dress. Again, that was my husband, not me. But and then the housewife on the left, she's gained a little weight. She doesn't wear her wedding ring anymore, but that all comes out, and these are all functional objects, all owned by different collectors of my work over time, which I am so grateful to have these beautiful people in my life that help me continue to create work that's dynamic and changing all the time. So my kids and my animals, I have 2 dogs right now, I have 3, have really just jumped into the forefront of my imagery, of course, because my life is, very enmeshed with my work. It's all sort of one big ball of hot mess, hot, beautiful mess, I should say. The piece on the left is called Back and Forth. And when you find yourself with 2 children and trying to juggle everything and trying not to bartend anymore and still be a great artist and fill the role of daughter and sister and friend, and things get nuts. And I think if I wasn't married and had children, I would have been way out of there. So in this piece, it's kind of like, all of these sort of different layers are on top of one another, and the ring is definitely trapped by that sort of playground image. That piece is about this big, so that you all know the work might look little. The teapots are relatively small, but I love to work in an outsized scale. It just, for me, has more impact, and playing with scale is just such a juicy feature in ceramics. Play with me is on this side, and thinking about my daughter's cohort in kindergarten, we did send them to a city school that we walked to, and a friend of hers came over and said, "How many families live in this house?" And I was like, "Oh my God, it's not even a giant house." But I'm realizing that we were very fortunate in sort of living in this castle was the catalyst for that piece. I am from a giant family, and birthdays are almost a competition for cake and celebration because there's so many of us. There's a few birthdays a month in my family. And I really enjoy that whole process of just cooking and serving food and being a part of a celebration. And I feel that there's nothing better than that. It's the epitome of life, is that sort of wish, that hope that my daughter has in her head, that she's going to blow out the candle and things are going to just come to life, what she wishes for. And as an artist, I do feel I have that opportunity in the studio, is that I get to create sort of what I wish for and what I'm thinking about, and it's just such a lovely, lovely thing to be able to do as a profession, as a life. I was making a lot of pies at this time, and wholesome pies and hot pies, thinking about the dichotomies that are out there for all of us, but me specifically as a woman, being super fabulous and domestic, and the perfect mother and wife, yet also hot and kind of, ready. So this says, "No matter where I serve my guests, it seems they like my kitchen best." These were pies that came off the wall. They were they looked very real, but had sort of different imagery that contradicted the inherent message of the pie. My kids, thank God, are doing great, but they grew up in a very wacky way, dancing and cleaning and being wild, but also hiking out in nature and loving the natural world. My parents have a farm, and so the city and country are still playing into my whole role as mother and still artist. That I just have to keep looking at and thinking about in a way that motivates me towards creating. When I create an image, I want people to come to it with that kind of wonder and that kind of feeling, as if they're looking and approaching something that is new and exciting and hopeful. Coming from Cleveland, this is an everyday sort of scene. On the left, I work in a screw factory and drive through a very industrial part of town to get to my studio. I was making a lot of cupcakes for bake sale at school, and so the cupcake making came into the studio. This is called Welcome to Ohio, and that is actually the neighborhood where my studio is and my factory. So that was about this big. The cakes just were a very natural segue into the studio. I was baking so much for paper towels at school and book fair that it just moved into the studio seamlessly, from the pies to the cakes. So these are 3 cakey pieces: merry-go-round on the far left, the Dirty Dozen, which is about this big, in the middle. That has 12 larger-than-life cupcakes. They've been shown here at the Riffe, this piece. The Akron Art Museum has it now. But those cupcakes all say something a little nasty, a little that you would need to have a spoonful of sugar to hear. So does this make me look fat? You drink too much. I wish it was bigger. Can I get a timeout? So those kind of things that you can't really say without a lot of sugar. The piece on the far left is called Pick Me. The cake plate says, "Choose me now, choose me now." Scale shift, like I was talking about before, my daughter would always say, "Yeah, we've got a pool, come on over." Very funny in our cohort of students growing up that this was our pool. So I love that sense of scale shift there. This is a piece called Just Ducky. I'm thinking directly about that, how things are just perfect sometimes when you see them that way. So these salt and pepper shakers are almost falling out of their little safe abode. It's leaking. They do come out and function. So this was another one of those assignments where someone said, "Would you please be in this salt and pepper shaker show?" which is a traditional format for ceramics. And I'm like, "Oh yes, I would love to." So super fun. In 2009, I was actually hit by a car when I was walking, and I was well into my studio practice, and my children were, I think, 11 and 9, and I thought it was all over. I was very damaged physically and not able to work for a long time. But the night I was brought into the emergency room on a backboard, my sister met me because my husband stayed back with my children. And my sister, one of my dear sisters, met me, was crying. And, Kristen, thank God you have lipstick on. And I was like, I know. Like, whew, phew. But I was okay, and I survived. I didn't work for a whole summer, was very broken. As soon as I recovered enough to be home, we decided, well, what the heck are we going to do? I can't work, I can't do yoga. Yes, I can still drink, so let's take the train across the country. So we took my parents and my children in 3 weeks and just traveled across the country to the mountains. And I shouldn't have been whitewater rafting, but my whole family is with me. And we just kind of ate it up. So it was lemons to lemonade. I was well again and creating work not too long after, less than a year, and with fervor, with just such intensity post that situation, thinking what a gift to be able to use my hands and my head again. This piece was the first piece successfully made after the accident, and it is called Just in Case. And my family had already labeled me the careful queen and the safety goddess, but after this accident, realizing that you could definitely look both ways and still get hit by a truck, this piece was the first thing that kind of ruminated out of sketchbooks and drawings into life. So it's about this big, and so obviously a rubber duck can float, yet she's on a life raft on the grass, fenced in, holding an umbrella. So every layer of safety kind of just being thrown out the window in some cases. I love ceramics so much, and this detail of the grass and the surfaces of what clay can do is just such a great illustration of the delicious nature of clay that doesn't even have to say anything to intrigue you and pull you in to the beauty of the material. And that's why I'm still so addicted to ceramics. I mean, it is a pain in the butt, and it can really fail over and over, but getting it right is just absolutely magical. This piece is in the collection of Rainbow Babies and Children's Hospital, and at one point in my life I thought I would be a surgeon. My father's a surgeon, and going to art school had been sort of a decadence. I went to a year of pre-med and dropped out and came back to art school, and I felt always sort of a little bit guilty about being an artist, like I'm just living this juicy life and making what I want to make. But having this piece in the hospital with a didactic about my situation, I've had people email me and call me and write me and say, I was in the hospital pushing my child or patient around, and we saw this, and we were just laughing so hard, and it just moved us. And those kind of situations, being an artist and living that life fully, when something like this comes back to you feedback-wise, I feel like I know I'm in the right place and doing the right thing with my hands and my heart and my mind. After I was injured, when I was recovering and starting to teach again and work again, my husband was injured. It was just like a train wreck. And we almost lost our house. So we were almost in foreclosure, and we were underwater with our mortgage. It was about that time when the crisis really hit in northern Ohio and Cleveland, and probably here in Columbus as well. So this piece came out of that situation. I had to still be the mommy and keep my best side out and, you know, show that sunny side and, you know, do all that stuff. But the dark side was that, you know, our house was really well cared for and lovely, but we were completely upside down. So this piece is very large scale. It's actually not my house. It's a house I saw that was abandoned in North Carolina on a trip to see my mother-in-law, but it seemed to me very sad and very articulate and ubiquitous sort of home, sweet home. Yet the color blue there, I usually make my houses yellow for that kind of bright, cheery feeling. And this house is very intentionally blue. The Canton Museum of Art owns this piece, and I really, truly love that. Adding metaphor in layer upon layer for me creates meaning along the way when I make the piece. I do a lot of research, but also after the fact for me. So one other nugget is giraffes cannot swim, so to have a giraffe toy in the pool that's overflowing is completely ironic. We live on the lake. We live at a state park. So again, I have a factory life, and then I have this beautiful lake in front of me. And we take really tons of hikes and kayak trips and everything to the lake. And I pull that into my work constantly. My son, when he was about 11, surpassed me in scale. And this is a picture of that time down at the lakefront. So I was like, wow, he's really growing up. This is amazing. I deserve a trophy because, like, look at all their trophies for soccer and baseball and lacrosse and spelling. And, you know, a mother never gets a trophy. So I decided I am going to make myself some parenting trophies. So he went off to horse camp that summer with 12 girls and his best friend and he. They had been going all along, but the boys sort of filtered off and fell off and the girls kept going. And now he's bigger than me and sort of reaching this adolescent peak of hunkiness. And I'm thinking, oh my God, have I given the birds and bees talk enough? You know, does he know? So this one was about that. This parenting trophy is called, I'm blanking on the title, but it has a list of things. Make sure to look for blank. Blank is forever. Always wear blank. Try to keep it in your blank. So you're not saying anything. It's called fill in the blank. That's the title. But all of those things that you tell your kids to be safe and, you know, and then using the birds and the bees as a sort of kitschy metaphor. But he did come home without getting anyone knocked up, so that was great. Yeah. And still I'm not a grandmother, which is awesome. Thinking about fertility and the metaphors around birds and nests, over time, you saw the first probably wedding ring in the very beginning. Over time, I make rings that are like larger than life when something comes up and into my realm of thought. So this is called a bird in the hand, and a very giant ring. It's probably almost 3 feet high. Thinking about how one in the hand is better than two in the nest, two in the bush. We do have a farm, and those images come in and out of the work all the time. My sister was living in New York City, and my daughter, we would go there a lot. So again, city, country, and these images just, this is our donkey, Ernesto. These images just pile into my psyche and come out in my sketchbooks. And the animals and the situations find metaphors. I find metaphors for them to sort of speak my language. This is called, What Would You Give Me If I Let You Down? Seesaws are not super prevalent on playgrounds anymore, but we grew up with them, and I was sort of a lightweight. And we had this game, Mr. Brown, what would you give me if I let you down? And you really got damaged if you were the lightweight up here and someone wanted something from you, like your Halloween candy or to ride your bike, because they could just get off and... So thinking about this piece, my husband and I have been married about, I don't know how many years, I'm not into math, but a lot of years, and all of his friends seemed to be getting divorced. And it was all about the settlements, and like she got the house in Vail, and you know, all this crazy divorce talk. And here the fulcrum is obviously the house and the home, and there's a lot of weight physically, not physically, but visually on that fulcrum. And you know, we weren't having the best of times in our marriage at this point, and it was really, you know, teeter-tottering, and freedom for me seemed just like a complete illusion. And I do see the bird as a symbol a lot of freedom, and so if that bird flew away in this situation, that sort of beast of burden would be very, very damaged. So What Would You Give Me If I Let You Down? The title is a really good lead into the content of that piece. The seesaw is wood, it's hand-carved wood, and the handles are stainless steel. I love to work with different materials. As you can see in this exhibition, some of the pieces are not even ceramic. And this piece is about this long. It doesn't actually move, but hopefully it has the illusion of moving. It was shocking when they seemed so little and so needy, and then they got so big and so dynamic and sort of almost adultish. Those years were tenuous, the teenage years, with lessons learned and dangers and hurdles ahead. And this piece that's in the exhibition, Welcome Friends, came about the time my son was a teenager, kind of drinking in high school and driving, and just not drinking and driving, hopefully, but probably. Not him, but maybe he was in situations. Everything seemed very dangerous. And a man at our farm built a shack on our property, and illegally, and he shot a little deer that put its head into the window, right from his barca lounger. And he bragged about it to the whole town up there, and it's a very small town. And when we heard this, we were just like, what? And Bambi was literally killed. And this gentleman, I shouldn't say gentleman, this man had these guns above his doorway when you would go into his house if he needed something, or if you needed to have him move his tractor out of the way. And it literally said, "Welcome friends," with these guns over the doorway. So that whole sort of reality of, welcome, not welcome, came through in this piece. The loss of innocence, that sort of Disneyfication of childhood was really over, where a hot bath and hot cocoa couldn't cure everything anymore. There were bigger fish to fry in my kids' lives that I didn't sort of feel like I had the toolbox for. So that was an expression directly of that time. This again is in that same sort of time frame. This is about this big, and it seemed like a good idea at the time. And we did build our home in the city of Cleveland, and we sent our kids to Cleveland Public Schools, and it did seem like a great idea at the time. But as we sort of grew up and we faced high school there, a very scary reality came to be that this was not going to be the safest situation to be in. So we ended up sending them to private high schools, which was hopefully a good decision. But this piece was an iteration of those feelings. When you become a parent, you think everything might be rosy and it'll be okay and you can handle it, but being a parent of a teenager, the toolbox is empty when you go in there and you think, oh, I've got these tools. I know how to bake and cook and read a story. The piece on the left is called "We're Gonna Need a Bigger Boat." So using that ubiquitous phrase from Jaws, waking up one day to find that one of your people that you love so dearly is in a lot of turmoil and you can't sort of handle it. So that was the feeling that I got, that sick, terrible feeling of being gravely unprepared. I love the imbalance of this piece, and sometimes I use pegs and I weld some things that make the pieces stack awkwardly to seem precarious, because I was in a very precarious place emotionally with this time period in my life. This piece is owned by the Crystal Bridges Museum of American Art in Arkansas, and so are actually the past couple pieces. They came to see the work and collected it and showed it for a couple years across the country. Again, a ring on this side, and this is like sort of just a prayer to my husband. It's called Beacon, and him being sort of my savior at all these years of being my stability and my life ring and the person that I look to keep me stable, because I'm like a heart attack waiting to happen all the time, and he's got this beautiful, soothing and lovely, stable personality. That piece was sent to the Weissman Museum in Minneapolis, so grateful for that. I work in the studio with my mother, so my mother is incredible and came to art late in her life, was a teacher and had 7 children, and she says, since I started making art so late in my life, I have to make a masterpiece every day. So she really keeps me grounded. That's my piece on this side, which is about this big, and this is a rumination of hers on this side, which is also huge, but it's so lovely to be able to spend time working and creating with my mother, my creator, so it's really a lovely, lovely thing that I get to do. She's 78 and she makes so much work, it's crazy. I told you I lived at the lake, and I really participate fully in our beautiful lake. I swim and kayak, and I have a paddleboard and dogs, and the things that I see every day just sort of play into the work. Those are 2 of my sweet doggies getting sticks for me. But thinking of myself as a maker, but also as someone who's still being formed all the time, I feel like I'm a work in process. These pieces came out of that. This is called Failing Upward, and she is a very big sort of beginning to a puppet. Thinking about keeping my best side out. You don't always have the true face on, and so using Pinocchio as a metaphor here, and that the Geppetto's workshop. I feel like I'm always sort of carving away at who I am and what I am becoming in the world. So this ladder is made of wood, and the Pinocchio is clay. This piece is called Unfinished Dreams, and the ladder, again, is wood. Clay hates to be long, so wood is long, strong, so I usually use all of my long elements in either metal or wood. So Unfinished Dreams, the head part is clay and glazed to be appearing to be wood, and then the ladder plugs into that. Even my vacations are part of my studio practice, so I'm not a rich and famous person, so when we do go on vacation, we try diligently to go at least once or twice a year with the kids. I will sign up for a place that I know I need to go do research. So Sarasota, the Ringling Brothers Museum is in Sarasota, Florida, so we took the train down to see the Circus Museum because I was working with a lot of, feeling like I was the ringmaster in my own circus, so I needed to go see those pieces in person. So this is actually a diptych. These are Riffons. These were the maquette sort of, but they're cups. And for this big piece, and then this is the life-size piece. So these pieces take up about 9 feet. And it's called Roll Call, What Kind of Mother Are You Anyway? And I saw these beautiful bases that elephants and horses would stand on, and I thought, oh, I need to use that in my work. So I made these mother masks. I saw these big masks at the Ringling Museum where the clowns would come, and when there was a scene shift, the clowns would come and put a giant mask on and run around and distract the crowd from, you know, what hot mess of scene change was going on. And I felt like, oh my God, I so need those. I was never feeling like the right kind of mother at the right time, so I made myself these big masks. So sort of Mother Goose, Mother Bear, and then obviously the clown mother. My son, I was teaching, and I was a crazy person, and he came home, and I had brought like an already baked chicken from like the grocery store home to like feed them dinner because I then had to go teach somewhere else, and my husband was traveling, and he was being a real piece of work, and he's like, oh, really, Mom? It's probably not even organic. What kind of mother are you anyway? And he poked me, and I was like, ah! And it was that point where I was so exhausted that I didn't sort of flip him off. I just was like crushed. But then I wrote that down. I was like, oh yeah, what kind of mother are you anyway? And so this piece came out of that. It did take about 6 months, but it's a beautiful, lovely expression of that sort of time period in my life. Again, working in series is something that I have done my entire career. So it's lovely to be in this exhibition where diptychs and triptychs are highlighted. The pieces on this side are shot glasses that actually function. And so Mama's is the biggest, but yet she's holding hers up on her, nose, and Daddy is on his, so that whole thing unseats, and then you can use that shot glass. These are specifically for tequila. And then the one on the baby bear's back is just a little tiny bit of hoochie, like maybe if the baby had a sore throat, a little bourbon. But I didn't have my kids drink. But the piece on this side is called It Was Hard to Get Out of the House in Those Days. And for me, the toddler years and when they were really little and nursing, it wasn't that hard. I could get a babysitter and go out. But when they were teenagers, it was like I need to dig a moat around the house and like have a cage and cameras and take a picture of the liquor cabinet and make sure there were condoms out, and it was just like a crazy time. So this piece was really just expressing my angst in those years. And it's not like I think about this and plan it in my sketchbooks. I'm writing about it, I'm journaling about things, I'm making sketches, using symbols that are in my vocabulary visually. I title the pieces and then I make them, I edit them, but then looking at them when they're finished is when I really get to learn from the objects and pull out a lot of the content. So that's part of how I work process-wise. The next summer, I really felt like I was being killed by my kids. They were both like driving and being crazy teenagers, and I felt iconized. They would still, oh, Mom, you're the greatest, and thinking about how we do iconize women and mothers in our society. This piece came out of that summer. I do have a friend who, at this exhibition, I was like, how are you dealing? It was before I made this piece, but I had made the mother piece. How did you get your son through these years? And she had this son who was like 25, and it looked like I had never met him, but I felt like, oh my God, if I could just, if they could just make it a few more months. And I'm super angsty, and like I said before, not the perfect mother, so I was like, how did you do it? And she was like, Kristen, you just have to be air. And I was like, what? And, because I'm all like, axes and hammers and like guns, crazy person, like trying to keep things safe. And she was like, no, just be air. Be there when you need them, but don't be too much, and just be available. And I was like, oh my God, that's genius. So I started with that thought, and I started to literally meditate on those words that she said to me. And be air, I just kept writing it, and I made hundreds of flowers, and then I had this cut out of acrylic, and I thought, oh, if I could, that's it, I need to do that. So this piece is called How To, like how to be, and it hangs down and has this gorgeous, gorgeous shadow around it, and it's about this big. And thinking about my kids leaving, but needing to know that I loved them dearly and cared for them and was always going to be there. So this piece was maybe 4 or 5 years ago. And I did successfully make that piece, and then Jack brought home 16 rabbits, and I was all of a sudden a freaking rabbit rancher in the middle of Cleveland. And I'm a vegetarian, so he was like, I thought you would love it because it was a meat auction, and they're going to be like killed. And I was like, oh my God, we have 2 dogs and 3 jobs, and now we have 16 rabbits. So we ended up being rabbit ranchers, and it was a total hot mess, and I just had rabbits on my brain. And in order to sex rabbits, you need to have gone to like ag school. I mean, we tried to keep them apart. This is Cheryl. We called her Aunt Cheryl. She looked like one of my daughter's Aunt Cheryl. So they named her Aunt Cheryl, and she was magnificent. She was like this incredible enigma of calm and grace and beauty. And she had 7 little nuggets when she first came to us. And she pulled out all her fur on her stomach and dug a hole and lined the hole with her own freaking fur. And she was just this goddess, this maternal goddess. And so instead of all these other pieces I thought I was going to make with rabbits, I ended up with this piece, which is called Pirate. I was really taken over by fertility the past 17 years of my life raising these children. And rabbits being the perfect fertility symbol, I just owned that. So this piece is about this big, and Aunt Cheryl fills the whole boat, and I even made her a little bronze crown with garnets in it. I love that piece. The next few pieces were obviously rabbits because we had them for about 6 months, a little bit more. We had one for a few years. The piece on this side is called the Manhattan Project. At this point, my son was again trying to kill me, trying to go into the Marines instead of to college. So this is about this big, this beautiful little nugget that I nurtured and had in my womb and in my life, and was so smart and beautiful, was then going to hold this ballistic missile. So that is called the Manhattan Project. He ended up going to school in Manhattan, and well, actually in Queens, which was amazing. So thank God he didn't go into the military. And then the piece here is called The Weight of Memory. After the rabbits were gone and my son was off to college, there was this acknowledgement that yes, my life of fertility and being this mother figure was really coming to an end. So again, this is sort of a memorial to that period in my life. And this is actually one of our rabbits. It was one of Aunt Cheryl's babies called Only. Again, meditating on the material ceramics is a lovely, lovely, beautiful thing to do. And when my kids went to college, just the thoughts and writings about please keep them safe, please have them, do their work as humans, be good humans, etc. So this piece is about 8 feet long, and it's called Pretty Pretty Please, and it is hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of flowers, and that's at University Hospital's Women's Hospital now. I did deserve a crown after getting my 2 children to college and not into the military. I know the military is amazing for some people, not for my children, hopefully. So I deserved a crown, so I made myself this giant crown called Corona Factotum. And I sewed this beautiful velvet pillow to cushion it on. It was a moment of hubris when I thought things were going great, and I should not have done that, but it's okay, I did it, and I acknowledged my family jewels, which are all adorning each of the settings in this beautiful crown. My son came back from New York City from his college career there, his brief college career in New York City, and ended up taking a year off and doing part-time school. And this piece is called Heavier Than I Thought, and using that bird again as a symbol for freedom. This piece is about 8 feet, 7.5 feet long, and the bird is ginormous. Thinking about just the weight of freedom and how it is much heavier than anybody thinks. This piece is going to be installed at Akron Children's Hospital Friday morning. They've had it for a few months, and we are installing it Friday. Love that piece. My daughter is also at college now and thinking about the ways in which we grow and move on and move up in life. I really meditated on that for almost a year before she left. And I've always used grass as a symbol of domesticity. So I made this piece here after a year of these are sort of influences coming into it and the piling up of objects and items. And I made this piece that is called Sursum Corda, which means lift up your hearts in Latin. And thinking about her leaving, getting excited about her leaving her future, I didn't really prepare myself for the utter desolation and sadness I was going to come to feel. But I designed this piece, and it took about 9-10 months to create, and I think that was because I knew that this was coming. And again, talking about realizing how things are after the fact, when the object is in front of me and I can internalize it more fully and see it as something other than me and my creation, but seeing it as something that is an object out in the world. I kept thinking I had made enough flowers, and it was over and over, and I never made enough flowers, and I was going to quit, and I was so freaking sick of the flower making, and so I went to the hospital to see Pretty Pretty Please installed, and I saw people looking at it and sitting there, breathing that in, just for encouragement. I went to see the piece up in a public space, and I'm like, you can do this, girl, you got it! So I went back to the studio, and I finished it. After going to the hospital to see it. And here it is off to its new home, and we're installing it at the Progressive Corporation, and they have that in their permanent collection now. And the piece is so beautiful. It's about this high, and that beautiful ladder of sort of life and ephemeral beauty just disappears up into the sky. And it really is a piece of gratitude and meditation on the lovely journey of my life and of my daughter's life out of the house and home, and of course she's still in my life, but just that's a meditation, physical manifestation of where I was at that time in that year. And the gifts that I have as an artist are only as rich as the gifts that I have been given in my life, and every night I get to come home to this beautiful man who makes everything possible for me. He's been by my side for, I think, 28 years or something ridiculous like that. And my kids and my whole family are just such a big part of my lovely studio practice. So that is it, and if anyone has questions about anything, I am super happy to answer them, and I can answer them later if need be as well. So thank you so much. Thank you, thank you.
Thank you so much, Kristen, and thanks for everyone who tuned in to watch this. A reminder that you can rewatch this recording, even though it won't be live, it will be on our Facebook page, and it is also shared on the Ohio Arts Council's Facebook page. If you guys have any more questions, feel free to comment them on the post. We'll be on Facebook today, so we'll see those. And yeah, a round of applause for Kristen for her awesome
Thank you. Thank you so much.